You can watch us on our app, you can watch us on the website, and if you're doing so, don't forget to register so you can send me any questions or comments, things you'd like to know about, anything you may be pondering. We would love to hear from you, and it makes my life a lot easier when we get lots of questions coming in. It makes my brain go off in all sorts of weird and wonderful tangents, which is great to do. And yeah, we've started out with some fabulous elephant activity at Tau. Tau Waterhole has been rather quiet over the last couple of days we've been doing this, so great to see some elephants. It looks like we've got a couple of young males who are just sizing one another up for now. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more pushing and shoving. Proper immovable objects and a what's the phrase now? I can't think of it. The force and objects meeting together and colliding. Unstoppable force and an immovable object. There we go. But you can see the one on the right does look slightly bigger than the one on the left, and I think it's probably why he is winning. But this is by no means a full-on aggressive encounter. This is two young males just interacting with each other more than anything else. If you're ever lucky enough to see two elephants going at it properly, it really is quite the sight to behold. The power that is unleashed, the thuds, the clashing of tusks. It really is a monumental exchange. But this is very sedate, almost tender at times. And very important, of course, in elephant society. Young males will size each other up, and this is good practice in terms of when it becomes the real thing. If two males meet in a breeding opportunity, normally the bigger male will easily dominate the smaller male to the point where, generally speaking, it doesn't really come to fisticuffs, as it were. Elephants do respect their elders, and a larger bull will very easily see off a younger bull. He will submit and move away very quickly. But two equally matched bulls may have a fight, and that is something pretty impressive to watch. You can just see by the body language there's no true aggression here. It's just two boys having a little bit of a scuffle in the playground, if that. These sorts of activities, even just gentle play like this, is so important. It gets the muscles working, and it's a very important sort of education for elephants for when it does come to the real thing. And hierarchy within an elephant society is very, very important, as these elephants will learn as they grow older and enter into the mating game. It's difficult to put an actual age on these elephants. Of course, elephants can live up into their late 50s, perhaps even into their mid-60s under the right conditions. And generally speaking, in the elephant world, you won't really get any mating rights until you're probably in your 30s, because they just keep getting bigger and bigger and more bulky. And as I said, normally the biggest males will be the ones that have the breeding opportunity. So you have to wait a little bit of time in elephant society to have your opportunity. What a brilliant way to start the afternoon. This is one right trying to lock his legs. But there's a definite, not a huge amount, but you can see the one on the left is a little bit bulkier, and does seem to be winning the exchange, certainly. But look at that tenderness of that trunk. And so this is a very amicable encounter. You imagine these two probably grew up with each other. They've probably been doing this for years. Happy Sunday, canine girl, to you too. Nice to hear from you again. Thanks for getting in touch. Ooh. Looking forward to another great live at the Waterhole with me. I hope so too. I hope so too. And this is a fantastic way to start. We'll see what else the afternoon has in store for us. It's amazing the control that these animals actually have. There is so much power contained within that body, and yet you can see this is, as I say, a relatively tender exchange. It's just a little bit of, I don't even know the best way to describe it, but it seems strange to use the word tender, but it is just the way that little the tactile explorations with the trunks there. Oh, but it seems that whatever that discussion was, looks like it may be over for now. Peanut gallery at the back, little zebra moving off. Probably time to come down to the water for a bit of a drink after that little bit of exertion. So I would say, looking at the size of these shape, from my knowledge of it, I would put these in their sort of late teens, early 20s in terms of age. But say very, very hard to tell. One of the reasons that I would say that, other than just size, is the fact that from this shot at least, we're not seeing the rest of the breeding herd. And normally when elephants begin to come of age, it's rather similar to that of humans. Sort of by the time they start reaching their mid-teens, they're becoming a little bit more independent. And eventually, over a slow period, it's not a one day they pack their trunk, as it were, and leave, but they will start spending more and more time away from their natal herds. And when they do leave, they normally form up and join these little bachelor groups. So these two are going to have a go now. And what you'll often find in these sort of bachelor groups of males is that there will be one big dominant male within them, and these more subordinate males are known as askaris, which comes from the Swahili word for guard. The idea that they're sort of not exactly protecting the big male, but they're learning from him. He is their role model, and he also, from a biological perspective, does a great job of keeping their hormones in check. As I said before, when you have a big dominant male, the younger males respect that, and that just sort of suppresses the testosterone levels a little bit, and allows them a little bit more control in their life. You imagine what happens if you get youngsters with a testosterone excess. They can get a little bit boisterous, and you do often get some behavioural troubles. So having a big male within the mix, it just keeps everybody in line. Well, I thought about a bit of a drink, that one. Had a bit of a play in the mud, maybe feeling a little bit sorry for himself, because he did, I think, come off worst in that minor exchange that we saw. He's going to go and have some alone time. Consider his strategy and technique for next time. Let's see what those other two are up to. So again, a little bit of a gentle push and a shove. Looks like that one's also been settled. Lorraine, yeah, those two big boys certainly are enjoying themselves, having some great fun. All three of them now, in fact. It's well, I thought the slight aggressor that we saw to begin with looked like he'd done what needed to be done, and this third one's decided to come in now as well. I think the third one was the instigator in this case, but say quite normal, and you could almost argue it's what we would call allomimetic behaviour, which is sort of a knock-on effect. If animals see other animals doing the same thing, they'll often mimic that behaviour. So evidently just some form of communication within the group, so just keeping those hierarchies in check. And then, like I said, they've sort of moved off for now. Let's see what else we can find up here at Tau. If any of you have ever been up to Madikwe, it's a beautiful reserve. A little bit different from the low felt that I certainly am used to in the eastern side of Kruger. A little bit more arid, a lot fewer large trees, very much sort of dominated by this acacia scrublands that you can see in the background. And here we have a beautiful spur-winged goose. Very stationary spur-winged goose. Oh, there we go. Doesn't really look like feeding behaviour, just sort of wetting the feathers around the face, keeping moist. Of course, goose, like many of the ducks, because they are in fact more related to shell ducks than they are to geese. They're not officially geese. So I'm not sure who gave them the name spur-winged goose. That was not a good decision. But like most ducks, they do eat plant matter, a lot of filter feeding, although occasionally you'll see them actually plucking grass. But normally you'll find them running their beak through the water, filtering out little algae and other plant material. Very good. Into the buds there. But they will also eat some aquatic insects, smaller ones as well. A lot of animals that are not considered to be carnivorous or insectivores will do that, because insects are a very, very good source of protein. You often see it, particularly in young birds, getting fed by their parents, because that is an excellent way to get extra energy. One of the things I learnt recently about spur-winged geese, interestingly, is they do eat, as I said, some insects as well, and one of the things that they do eat are blister beetles. Now, if anybody has ever come across a blister beetle, you'll understand the name, but they produce, as a defensive mechanism, they produce a chemical known as cantharidin acid, which they squirt from parts of their body, and if it gets onto your skin and you've got sensitive skin, it can actually cause some blistering, as the name suggests. More often than not, they are very brightly coloured or contrasting colours, so blacks and reds and blacks and yellows, a little bit like a bee or a wasp, and that is an advertisement to any potential predator that they could be unpleasant to trifle with. And so it has been documented that spur-winged geese do eat blister beetles from time to time, and because of that, you have to be a little bit careful if you were ever considering to eat a spur-winged goose, because if they have ingested a lot of blister beetles, it can actually taint the meat and give it an unpleasant taste and potentially even turn the meat toxic. Now, not that I've ever eaten a spur-winged goose, but it is something to just be aware of, that you might get a nasty piece of spur-winged goose if he's eaten too many blister beetles. Amazing thing, those blister beetles, though, we see a lot of them in summer. They feed on plants and they do sort of buzz around, and you get sort of little influxes of them. They all hatch at the same time, and their larvae actually feed on grasshopper eggs, quite specifically some of the species that we have down in South Africa. So the parents often, or the female often, lays the eggs close to an area where there is a good proportion of grasshoppers, and those larvae, when they hatch, have to find grasshopper sort of egg casing and start feeding on it very, very quickly, otherwise they won't survive. So another interesting example of how so many things in nature are reliant upon each other for that species to proliferate. All part of the food chain and the food web. And that's why it's so important to have an excellent diversity in your ecosystem for it to be in good health. I always describe it as kind of like a scaffolding. The more diversity that you have, then the more aspects of it there are. And if you were to lose one or two aspects of it, it's not going to fall down. You imagine if you have a building sort of on stilts, if two or three of those stilts disappear, if there's 50 stilts to begin with, that building is still secure. But if your building only had four stilts to begin with and you lose two of them, the likelihood is that it's going to topple over. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have a good diversity in an area, and one of the dangers of too many introduced species that can take over, become encroaching species, or alien vegetation dominating an area. The upshot of that is that it reduces biodiversity, and that compromises the structure of the entire ecosystem. Oh, I thought we were going to get a little. That's everyone's going to get a little bit of a kick. Everybody seems to have a bit of feisty this morning. A little bit of feist. All right, well, that was a lovely way to start. Some elephants and some zebras and a few little birds. So I think we're going to go over to Jabulani now, and I believe we might have another member of the Big Five waiting for us. Let's go have a look. Ah, brilliant. So from the northwest over to the east into the Lowveld and Jabulani, so just outside Hoedspruit, which is where I spend most of my time. And we have a nice bachelor group of Cape Buffalo, or Duggar boys, as they're also known. This one actually looks like a female on the left. Yeah, so that's a female on the left and three males. Unusual to just see one female hanging out with the boys there. Whether there's more of the herd somewhere close by, I'm not sure. Normally, you would find the females and the young, and a lot of young males, and more dominant males in big herds, numbering potentially up into the thousands. But quite normal to find little groups of either sort of solitary individual males or groups of four, five, six, seven, eight older males hanging out together, usually close to water. Become very water dependent, prefer the softer vegetation around waterholes. So a little bit unusual to see one female with a group of males. Possibly she was separated from the rest of the herd. Maybe they were harassed by some predators, some lions or something last night, and she got splintered off from the main group. That's a possibility. Maybe she particularly enjoys the company of these three boys. Who knows? So anybody not aware, this term Duggar boys will be something you'll hear quite often. If you look into safari or ever come onto safari, Duggar comes from an old African word meaning mud. Due to the habit of these older male buffaloes, they do like to wallow around in the mud and splosh around, covering themselves, a little bit like we saw the elephant splashing mud on himself earlier. And for the same reasons that most animals do it, for as a natural sunblock, and also to help with parasite loads and tick loads, a lot of scratching using the particles of that soil as an exfoliant, try and dislodge some of those pesky ticks that attach onto the skin. And buffaloes are quite susceptible to ticks, thousands and thousands of ticks on a buffalo's body, which is why we often see, and you may be able to hear that in the background. In fact, one's just landed on the eye of that female, an oxpecker. Specializes in removing ticks from these animals. Okay, it looks like we may have had a little bit of a feed issue there. So we've moved across to Vic Falls Safari Lodge. Sorry, the buffalo froze. So we're back up to Vic Falls, where we spent quite a lot of time yesterday enjoying the vultures and again these marabou storks. And this reminds me, I was asked a very good question, Canine Girl, I think it may have been you, about why the heads of these marabou storks, because they've got so little feathers on their heads, do they not ever get sunburnt? And generally, sort of, birds getting sunburnt as a discussion. And I threw a few ideas around because I really wasn't sure. One of the things I suggested was that there was a natural sort of skin oil or secretion that was formed, and I actually did try and do a little bit of digging on that after we finished because I thought that was an excellent question. It's quite difficult to get a succinct answer, but what I did find out was very interesting. There is a substance which was first identified in algae, which of course is the green sort of plant-like substance you find on the top of water. There's a substance within them called gadusol. Now, gadusol acts similar to the way melanin acts for people. It absorbs UVB rays, those harmful rays, and protects those organisms against damage from sunlight. And it's thought that with animals eating algae, animals have also picked up that gene. And it was then discovered first in zebrafish. I forget which year it was. I think not that long ago, and maybe in the 70s or the 80s. And they discovered that zebrafish were using this gadusol within their eggs to stop the eggs being damaged by UVB rays. And since then, it's been discovered that almost all animals are able to produce this gadusol substance, with the exception of mammals. So we find it in amphibians, we find it in birds, we find it in fish, but not in mammals, because mammals have hair to protect them from the sun. Now, there's no reason theoretically why mammals shouldn't have developed gadusol. It's probably not a bad idea because some of us, like myself, do struggle in the sun. But if you look back at the evolutionary history of mammals, one of the reasons that is postulated as to why mammals don't produce gadusol is when we tend to think of mammals as sort of dominating the terrestrial land of the Earth. But don't forget, back in the early days, hundreds of millions of years ago, that was down to the dinosaurs, and they tended to eat small mammals. So back in those days, mammals were pretty much resigned to a subterranean existence to avoid the big scary dinosaurs. Did a lot of moving around at night time. So they probably never developed that gadusol, because when they started out, they didn't have a need for it because they avoided sunlight to avoid the larger predators. And since then, we've come up with, or mammals have developed hair. That's one of the reasons that we have hair, because we started out life in a subterranean, dark and cool environment. So we have never felt the need to develop this gene, it seems. That being said, the problem with sunblock that we use on ourselves is it does contain a lot of chemicals, and then we all go swimming, and that can be very bad for the marine environment. So there is a bit of a push at the moment to start developing this, or working within the scientific community to incorporate sunblocks for humans using gadusol as its sort of primary element. And there has been some progress made with this by manipulating the genetics of yeasts to be able to harvest this and then possibly put it into product form that we can use. And because it's done more on a genetic level, it doesn't necessarily have to be a spray or a cream that is applied to the skin. It may actually be able to take the form of a pill that is ingested, and then it actually has an effect on us on a more genetic level and helps us to utilize that gadusol within our skin. And the upshot of that is, when we go swimming, we don't need that oily secretion everywhere. We don't accidentally have to spray ourselves in the eyes with sunblock. And then, because a lot of it's quite alcohol based, it gets in your eyes and it stings, and it doesn't harm the marine environment at all. So another great example of humans looking at nature for inspiration, a mimicry idea, and taking something that's been around for hundreds of millions of years and finally incorporating it into our existence. So that was a very long explanation, but I think it was Canine Girl yesterday asked me that question, and it's always fun to go down the rabbit hole of finding out some explanations on this, and that was the best one I could come up for. So I learned something as well. Thank you for that. Kabaz, you've asked me a question. Let me have a look. How does one monitor the kill rate of predators versus the survival of the animals being hunted? I assume what you're asking there is sort of what is ultimately the success rate of hunts? Well, um, again, I'm just sort of thinking on my feet here, but I would imagine that it will be done because we're in a position where a lot of tourism enjoys watching these animals, and there's a huge amount of research being done on these animals. That it's generally through observation and recording. There's a lot of projects that are specifically sort of headed towards monitoring predators and the role that they play within ecosystems and the knock-on effects of predator-prey dynamics in relationships. So it would be a case of taking the law of averages into account. If you watch a lion hunt 100 times and it's successful only 20 times, then you could suggest that it only has a sort of a 20% hit rate. Of course, that will change within individuals. Certain individuals will be more skilled at taking out predators, perhaps due to their upbringing, what they have learnt. You have to take in so many other factors, such as what is the prey population? Is it an introduced species? Are they well adapted? Have they had a lot of experience being hunted by that particular predator? Are there any diseases? What are the habitat types? So there's an awful lot of variability, but ultimately for something like that, we have to take the averages. And a lot of these organizations will all collate their information, often through various different universities, and make that available for larger scale studies. Good Mango. Good afternoon to you. Are the feathers of most birds more or less the same texture? Feathers of some birds of prey look quite rough. No, there are various different types of feathers that you can get. The most obvious difference between them would be those feathers sort of on the external part of the bird itself. So the flight feathers, the tail feathers, those are generally a lot more sturdy, a lot more rigid, because they have to deal with being out in the open. And if you're going to use them for flight, they have to cut through the air a little bit better, and they can't deteriorate too quickly. Otherwise, you may fall out of the sky, which would be a little unfortunate if you're a bird. In any way, shape, or form of flight. They are there purely as an insulation layer, keeping the body warm, basically. So you get lots of different categories of feathers, types of feathers that have evolved differently depending on the role that they fulfill. Vulture feathers, particularly, we often do find vulture flight feathers, and they are very, very sturdy. That central vein can be maybe sort of 5-6 millimeters across, making it very, very rigid, particularly in the larger birds, the heavier birds. So a lot more wear and tear that can potentially be picked up. But the majority of these vultures are the hooded vultures. You can tell that from their size and that relatively small beak. And then one on the left, I'm assuming, is a white-backed vulture. You can see a much stronger looking bill. And then those two marabou storks. We saw one yesterday standing on that little island who wasn't too impressed when another one approached it. I wonder if it's the same individual, and that's very much his spot. I say his, difficult to tell the difference between males and females. And it looks like there's possibly a spoonbill who just went behind a little bush. Let's see if he pops out on the left. Are you a spoonbill? I think so, looking at your general shape. Looks like we've got an ibis in the foreground and something following the spoonbill. I thought I saw him doing a bit of a stretching out his wings and creating a sort of cape. In which case, that could be a black heron, because that it does look like it from its sort of silhouettes there. And that's one of their amazing little hunting adaptations. They extend their wings and sort of wrap them in front of them, sort of like a Batman pose. And that removes a lot of the glare from the sunlight and allows them to see what's passing close to them under the water. I don't know of any other birds that do that. It's quite a unique behaviour to the black heron. Interesting to see if he does it again. It seems to be very much following this, what I think is a spoonbill, possibly a yellow-billed stork. Not quite sure from here. The two seem to be either working in tandem, or maybe the heron is benefiting from this other bird moving through the shallows and disturbing fish. No, it looks like a yellow-billed stork, not a spoonbill. My apologies. The yellow bill kind of gives it away. This other bird's very much following him around. I think it is a black heron, and we do get to see him do that cloak maneuver. I've only ever seen black heron once, I think, up in Tanzania. Don't think I've ever seen one in South Africa. Yes, that's definitely an ibis entering there on the right hand side. The black and white coloration makes it a sacred ibis. Quite a common bird in South Africa and Southern Africa in general. You can see that long decurved beak just probing around in the mud. The one behind on the far bank there, I think, again, difficult to tell from this view, but could well be a glossy ibis. Right, so we're going to head all the way up to Kenya now. We're doing our little safari across all of Africa. Started in South Africa, up to Vic Falls. Let's go up to Oldonyo in Kenya. See who might be joining us there. Wow, look at that. A beautiful lizard of some description. Now, I have to say I've never visited Kenya, so I'm certainly not going to try and tell you exactly what this is. It looks like some sort of agama-based reptile, but say my particular knowledge of specific Kenyan reptile species isn't great, but I'm guessing some form of agama or something very similar. Looking at the shape and particularly the way it's moving around there. You just saw a bird come flitting past, I think, and there's very much a defensive posture. You see how he's raised up that orange head, expanded that throat pouch, showing off those bright colours, just moving in a particular way, possibly just warding off any potential danger. Okay, well, he didn't hang around for very long. Decided that it wasn't the best place to be. But possibly it looks like maybe a superb starling hiding behind the branches there, looking at that coloration. That little sort of pile of wood there, almost like a kraal that's been made up there. Perfect place for that lizard to hide out. Not unusual to see them out on an exposed perch like that, soaking up the sun. Of course, being thermic and cold-blooded, very much a requirement to warm up, get the blood up to optimum temperature for activity. It looks like a bit of a cloudy day there in Kenya, so taking advantage of those minimal rays of sun filtering through. Again, not getting burnt, thanks to one assumes that gadgusol substance or pigment within their skin. And that looks like an emerald spotted dove, or the Kenyan equivalent thereof. Shame that lizard didn't hang around for longer, hoping he'll put his head back out again at some point. Guess we're going to start seeing less and less lizard activity, particularly down here in the more southern reaches of Africa. As we move into the winter months, the days start getting shorter, and the lizards will be able to pick up on that. They have a special organ on their head called a pineal eye or a pineal gland. And one of the things that does is measure the length of daylight. So the length of day is very, very important to most organisms out there. They don't have clocks like we do, and they will figure out not only from the ambient temperature, but so sunrise and sunset times and how much daylight versus nighttime there is as a cue throughout the year, as terms of what activity they're going to do. Now, it's not to the point that they're going to decide what to do. It will have an effect on the hormones, and that will secrete substances into the blood and through the neural pathways, and that will have an effect of changing behavior. So things like hibernation in certain animals um, will all be dictated by the release of hormones within the brain, and a lot of the time that is stimulated by the length of day, particularly for things like breeding seasons as well. Squawking sounds, I'm assuming, are the starlings. They're not birds that I've spent a lot of time around, but they sound quite similar to sort of the blue-eared starlings that we get more in southern Africa. So I'm guessing that we're hearing some of those starlings. I see one top left there. Looks like a similar coloration. Coloration-wise, that looks more like a red-winged starling and a wattled starling. Lots of different starlings, but I stand to be corrected. My Kenyan bird knowledge. Of course, many of these birds are found across Africa. Maybe just some slight regional variations in coloration of the feathers. In form of weaver, Looks like what I would consider to be a lesser mast weaver from, again, Southern African perspective. This little pile of sticks, the perfect perching place. Yeah, so they certainly do look very similar to the greater blue-eared starlings, and that noise very similar. So I imagine very, very similar species. And the classic ring-necked dove used to be the Cape turtle dove. Used to be coming down for a little bathe in the water. Spectacular coloration there. Look at that beautiful metallic bluey green sheen that these starlings have, even though it looks like a relatively overcast day in Kenya up there. We're still getting those incredible colours, and that's all done through the layering of the keratin and little air pockets in between, and the spectrum of light bouncing around in different directions. That's why it seems to have that sort of shimmery sheen to it. A lot of birds, of course, do exhibit that sort of iridescent coloration. And interestingly, I remember doing some little bit of research on this a while ago in terms of why they would do it other than visual communication. Take something like a starling, it's those blue-eared starlings, they're always that colour. They don't change during the breeding seasons. Um, and you often find it in sort of flocking birds, birds that create large groups, because oddly, it seems that actually iridescence like that see, increases the temperature of the body. So it's certainly not a mechanism for keeping cool, which I once thought that it could be, sort of reflecting some of the heat, but it has suggested that, oh, it's another lizard, that iridescence actually absorbs a bit more heat. So it's thought now to perhaps be something to help the behavior of flocking birds, so that when one changes direction, it's very much apparent because of the changes of light and the feathers of your neighbors. It enables the entire flock to move as one, so they don't sort of bump into one another. Interesting way of looking at it. Alert little lizard. Now, one of the other interesting things about lizards from a defense mechanism is their ability to shed their tail in many species. Not all species. Agamas cannot, for example, but skinks and geckos are well known to lose their tails, and that's in a behavior or a response known as autotomy, sort of self-mutilation, where they can decide to jettison that body part and it will lie on the floor and flip-flop around, and potentially distract a predator, allowing the animal itself oh, got himself a little something there. The animal itself to get away. And what I found out recently as well, I got sort of lost in the rabbit hole of looking at animals and how they deal with things over the last couple of days doing this, is there are some species of scorpion which can also sotomize. They can actually jettison their entire tail, including their stinger, very similarly to the way that skinks and geckos do. However, sort of interestingly, the upshot of that is that because going off down a random rabbit hole here, but uh, the anus of a scorpion is situated quite high up on the tail. So when the tail is lost, so is the ability to excrete because it all seals itself off again. Now you would think that an animal that doesn't have that ability is going to have a bit of a constipation problem. But tests have been done to suggest that a scorpion's equivalent of arthropod equivalent of kidneys, which are known as Malpighian tubes, are particularly efficient and they don't defecate very much. And it can take up to 8 months before there is potentially a life-threatening problem. Oh, careful, buddy. A life-threatening problem. So again, you might wonder why has that not evolved out through natural selection? But it is deemed that because scorpions don't live for a huge amount of time, that potentially up to 8 months is more than enough time to allow a given scorpion to breed and pass on said genetics. And therefore, it hasn't been sort of naturally selected out because the whole point is to be able to breed. A random side note. What noise we're hearing there? It sounds like a type of lory, but like it could be go away birds. Tristan, good afternoon. You're asking, do lizards know how to change their camouflage from the time they hatch? I assume you're referring to more things like sort of chameleons with the ability to um, change the coloration of their skin. Again, as with most things in animals, it's not really a conscious decision. It's more of a reaction to certain stimuli. You'll find that animals, as they grow older, will develop more complex patterns of camouflage. Obviously, they are potentially getting larger and need better camouflage. Or you might find that as they get older, they will move to different habitats, which will require a different type of disruptive marking or camouflage, as you said there, to help them blend in. But they don't really have the ability. They don't go, oh, I know, today I'm going to be green, or tomorrow I'm going to develop pink and orange spots. It doesn't really work like that. It's not a conscious decision. You do get some animals which, of course, can mimic their surroundings, but to my knowledge, or from what we know, they don't go, oh, you put me on a yellow flower, therefore I'm going to turn yellow. It's the reaction, an unconscious reaction to the skin and the pigmentation and things called chromatophores and melanophores and various sort of called guanine crystals within the skin that will react to the surrounding stimulus and change the skin sort of automatically. It would be interesting to know whether there is any conscious reaction to it, but I would be surprised if that was the case. But never say never in the animal kingdom. We are learning new things pretty much on a daily basis. So we often don't give animals enough credit for choices that they make, but say a lot of it is instinctual and has been passed down through generations. And natural selection of what works and what doesn't work doesn't get passed on because those animals don't make it and their genetic material is not passed on to the next generation. what is interesting is you often will find regional differences and different colorations from the same species that occupy different areas. And again, that's sort of testament to the fact that the animal is able to, or the animal's physiology, if I could put it that way, is able to react to its specific surroundings. Our lizard is back again. Looks actually quite similar to what we would call a common flat lizard down in southern Africa as well, with that coloration. And a bird of unknown origin, I'm afraid I'm not quite sure what that is. Large red beak, looks sort of a mixture between a thick-billed weaver and a red-billed quelea, but I'm sure it is neither. That's a precarious vantage point. You can see those external sort of ear openings on the side there. Beautifully delicate fingers. In some reptile species, you can actually see that pineal eye. It's a little sort of pinprick hole on the top of the head that is measuring the length of daylight and the intensity of sunlight, which of course will reflect how high the sun is in the sky. Remember, in the summer months, the sun gets much higher than it does in the winter months when it's at its peak. But of course, up in Kenya, much closer to the equator, there is a lot less variation in day length. So it'd be interesting to see the difference in the reactions of animals up there, because there isn't such a need to react to particularly changeable climates. Of course, down in South Africa, coming into autumn and winter now, it can get surprisingly cool. If any of you are considering going on a safari and going in the winter months, which is a brilliant time to do it, be prepared to wrap up warm on an open safari vehicle on a cool winter's morning with the wind chill of driving through the fresh ambient air. It is a lot colder than you think, and I made that mistake when I first moved over there. I remember one evening hiding on the floor, pretty much tucked up into a ball because I was freezing because I was just in a t-shirt. And as soon as the sun drops, the air temperature just plummets down to very much single figures, and add wind chill into that, and it makes for quite an uncomfortable and unexpected experience. Spencer, you're asking, do agamas jump into the midair to catch prey? Um, Honestly, Spencer, I don't know. Um, they can certainly move quickly enough, and they would have powerful enough legs. Look at those back legs; they're almost like a grasshopper's. That they can certainly jump up in the air to evade predators. I see no reason why they couldn't jump up to grab something that was flying past. But I would think it might be a bit precarious to then land again on a branch like that, on the ground perhaps. But I don't think they would necessarily do so from a branch, from a safety perspective. Um, so yeah, not 100% sure on that one, Spencer, if I'm honest. I've never seen it, put it that way, but they are incredibly agile and they're certainly capable of jumping from an evasive tactic. But thanks everybody for the questions and the comments so far. Do please keep them coming in. Not sure what that was that landed there, but it did look a little bit lury-like, which possibly is what's making that noise. It's evading our zoomies. Hiding behind a branch. But yes, definitely looks like a luri of some description, or I should call it a Turaco now, I suppose. No, not a Turaco. Yes, Turaco. Some form of Turaco. Sorry, the old name for Turacos is luris. what I first learnt when I came over here, still getting to grips with all these name changes. Certainly much greener up here at Odongo, as you would expect, so more tropical than the subtropical environment of South Africa, at least. I'm just having a sneaky look to see if I can figure out what bird that might be. The closest I've got from a quick online check would be a white-bellied go-away turako, which does occur in Kenya. It's very difficult to see. We can just see a crest, but it does have that very large crest. I did see a white chest. Interested to see whether there's a sort of a white bar running across the tail, which I think I possibly saw in flight. So I'm going to put that down as a white-bellied go-away bird or go-away turako, which would make sense because it has a very similar voice to the one we get down in southern Africa. It is slightly more colourful. It makes sense. Times like this when I miss my big bird book, which is back in South Africa at the moment, where I am currently not. I do not like not having my library, particularly when doing things like this. I mean, the internet is a wonderful thing, but you never know what you're going to find. I'm old enough to still enjoy a good book, certainly. Let's have a beautiful bird book of all the birds of the Sahara, where I know this bird would be in there, as with the thing with the red bill. You have to take mental snapshots of them and look them up at some point. Looks like there might be a sort of a shade of pinky red around the face feathers there and on the crest, which would make sense in the turacos, because if you think of the purple-crested turacos particularly, and there are specific pigments that are only found in turacos, hence the name. There's turacovadin, which is the green pigment that we see in a lot of turacos in southern Africa, and then turacin is the red pigment that, if we take the purple-crested turaco as an example, the Livingstons or the Knysna turaco, when they fly, they have this most vivid, deep, almost sort of royal purpley red colour on the underwings, and that's not produced through the use of carotenoid pigments, which is how most birds get their reddish colour. The flamingos, for example, have that pinky red colour due to carotenoids. It's a very specific pigment found only within the turaco family and is what actually gives them their name. Beautiful little long-tailed something over there. White cask on the top of his head. Looks like a seed eater by the shape of the bill. Looking at the shape of the bill, I wonder if that's not a male, and we saw the females earlier close to the water with a more speckledy chest. They're similar to some of the widers that we would see in southern Africa, shaft-tailed and the pin-tailed widers. Ah, yes, you can see the male doing a bit of a display. That must be a female that's landed on the left. So again, if it is a similar type of behavior that we'd expect to see in what are called polygynous birds, where one male tries to attract multiple females, they will have a particular displaying area, which we would call a lek. Whenever a female comes close, the male will display, show off. We saw him there doing his flapping. There we go. Yeah, very much showing off to the females. And generally speaking, the one who does the best dance will have the best breeding opportunities. Those do not look like the ones we saw a little bit earlier, but definitely the females of this species. You can tell that from the way that the male is reacting, but certainly looks like some type of wider or similar species. But how cool is that? A pretty dance. The way he's changing his wing plane there whilst he's flapping. Awesome. Nice to see a little bit of behaviour like that. Again, a quick search whilst doing this is the nice thing. I can check things whilst you're watching. That is indeed a wider. It's known as a straw-tailed wider, which should make sense. Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. So yeah, looking at the general shape of it, those long tail feathers and particularly that type of behaviour, I figured it was a type of wider. Here we go, straw-tailed wider. A couple of new birds for me today. Although I can't add them to my list, it doesn't count, unfortunately, seeing them on a camera feed. But good to know. It does say it occurs in Tanzania. So I did spend a year in the very far south of Tanzania, but the majority of the bird life that we got there is very, very similar to that of southern Africa. But Tanzania being much further north, I found that there was kind of a band running across Kenya. And either side of it, you've got a big difference in the number of species that you found, or different types of species that you found. So a lot of southern Tanzania around Sulu and Ruaha and Katavi, which is where I was. Uh, the majority of those birds could be found in southern Africa. Proudly SA, good afternoon. Thank you for your question there. So during a drought, is there a bit more competition between birds of prey? Um, Theoretically, yes, there'll always be more competition if what is being competed over um, is less available. That being said, birds of prey are carnivorous, and during a drought, that's actually when carnivores do very, very well because the herbivores on which they feed are struggling for food and therefore becoming weaker and slower and taking more risks. So you normally find with the more sort of classic predator populations, in terms of big cats and so on and so forth, that their population numbers will increase during times of drought because all the herbivorous animals are struggling. They don't have access to those resources. So theoretically, I would say, if anything, there will be less competition during a drought, and or maybe more competition uh, at the site of a deceased animal or at a carcass, because there's more opportunity. It'll be far more visible during a drought because there'll be less vegetation hiding it. So it may elicit more competition at a particular um, carcass or site where there is food available. But in theory, so predators do well during drought conditions. It's the legs of a giraffe. Oh, what a beautiful view of this Maasai giraffe. How lovely is that? Against the cloudy skies there. It's quite the portrait. Oh, we've got a couple of them. A miniature stretch of giraffe. Oh, we're going to have a drink. We saw a lone giraffe drinking yesterday. It's always fun to watch. We're discussing that the way that nuchal ligament in the back of the neck has to stretch to allow her to get right the way down to the ground. Definitely thinking about it, just making sure there's nothing creeping up. And emphatically licking their tongues. Well, I should say licking their lips with their tongues. That's again just sort of in anticipation of the water to come. The same way we tend to salivate when we're thinking about food. Give me that water and start the rather ungainly process of reaching it. Oh, just lost her footing a little bit. And after a classically archetypal African scene, sort of a flat topped acacia like an umbrella thorn in the background, and giraffe drinking against a very interesting sky. With the different cloud layers that we can see there. We've got cumulus and stratus clouds and cirrostratus there. makes for some nice depth. Thinking out loud, but going back to that question about competition amongst birds of prey during drought, of course, in southern Africa, the drier months are the winter months. And in the summer months, there is a bit of an influx of migratory species, which does lead to more competition perhaps in the summer months. And you often find that a lot of the resident birds of prey in southern Africa, at least, do breed during the winter months, possibly because there is better prey available or better food availability, as that's use food rather than prey, depending on the species, and also because there is less competition, there is less numbers of birds being there because the migrants are elsewhere. Tandem giraffe taking for a minute. Very persistent. This one's gone for a much more splayed approach. Just looks so awkward. Hey, Sasha, you've asked when a giraffe gallops, does it use a three-step gait like a horse? Now, that sounds like a very official term coming from someone who is no doubt a bit of an equestrian. Um, I don't know exactly how to explain a three-step gait, but what I can tell you is that a giraffe does not gallop like a horse. No. Giraffes have a very unusual form of locomotion. You can just see by the way they walk. They are one of the few animals that walks with both right legs in this case, and then both left legs at the same time. They don't alternate their legs like most quadrupedal animals do. And so that in itself is unusual. But when a giraffe gets up to full steam, which is can be very, very fast, we're talking sort of 70 kilometers an hour, 50 miles an hour, can outrun a lion theoretically with those long legs. Um, they actually they sort of splay their front legs apart, and then the two back legs come up in tandem in between them. So it's more like a high speed bound, I suppose. So it runs very, very differently and locomotes generally very, very differently to sort of the classic horse. So camels and also the hyenas run in a similar, or certainly walk in a similar vein as well. So both left legs, both right legs. One of the reasons that the giraffe's Latin name is Giraffa camelopardus, which directly translates to camel horse, basically. But you're far more likely to see it up here in East Africa, in the open grassy plains of East Africa. Down in southern Africa, with our far more sort of bushveld environments, there are far fewer large open areas where a giraffe can sort of truly get up to full speed. Something that I've seen giraffes run, but I've never seen a giraffe going absolutely flat out. Same way I've still never to this day seen a cheetah going full pelt. I've seen cheetahs running, chasing things, but without having access to those huge open areas where there isn't the danger of smashing headlong into a tree for the cheetah. I've never seen one going absolutely full out yet. It's one of those bucket list things. Thank you, Sasha. I hope that's answered your question to some extent. That was a beautiful scene. The giraffes drifting off from whence they came. They came in from that direction. You get some nice surprises at these cameras because you're often sort of focusing on one area and suddenly you zoom out and oh, there's an elephant, or oh, there's a giraffe. It's one of the things we often tell people on safari. People are so obsessed with taking photos nowadays that they tend to forget to take in the entire scenario. Well, I suppose that has changed a little bit now. It's actually quite rare to see somebody bring a camera unless they're a proper photographer or a keen photographer. So many people just using their phones and tablets now on drive to take videos and photographs. So what we used to find happen an awful lot is that people would be so intent with staring down the eyepiece of their camera that they would forget to look around them. It happened on more than one occasion. You've got somebody taking their 300th photograph of a sleeping lion, and they don't see the lion that walks right past them next to the car because they're so intent on focusing down the viewfinder. It's always a good idea just to keep your wits around you. Anything can happen at any time out in the bush, and it's important to take it all in. There's only so much that a camera can record. It's an instant snapshot, but our brains and our eyes can take in so much more and create indelible memories that will stay with us for the rest of our lives. We don't have to post everything on social media. Sometimes they could be kept deep within us. Okay, well, that was a nice little flurry of activity up in Eldonia in Kenya. So we're going to head back to Tower Lodge down in Madikwe and see if there's any more activity at the waterhole there. Okay, here we are back to Tower, scene of our little elephant rumble earlier. And we've got some lovely zebras making their way across. Very, very different landscape, as you can see, far more barren. Different type of soil. You can see that whitish soil not supporting as much nutrients to allow things to grow. And of course, with this being a pumped water hole, there's an awful lot more activity, making it harder for things to grow in this area. But a very, very popular spot for all mammals, great and small, Tower Waterhole. Not just mammals. Often see crocodiles roaming the waters as well. And a nice variety of bird life. It's certainly a lot less lush and scrubby, particularly this time of year. You can see the landscape in the back there, very sort of rocky. There's a big rocky ridge that runs close to the lodge up there, and it's characterized by a lot of these smaller, different acacia species. A lot fewer large trees. Very rare to see a leopard hoisting anything into a tree. We get some shepherd's trees up there in Madikwe. That's about the biggest thing you're going to find. So not quite the haven that you get in the eastern side of South Africa in the Lowveld, with those large trees along river lines, particularly the jackalberries and the marulas that we often see leopards hoist their spoils into. A lot less pickings up in this part of the country. A nice little dazzle of zebra enjoying an afternoon drink. This looks like a male coming in at the back and being greeted. I say that just because of the behaviour that we saw, but also if you look at his stripes, they're just a little bit more contrasty, a little bit more black and white. Still has the shadow stripe, that little brown line in between the black lines. But males are often just a little bit more striking in terms of their markings, a little bit more, there's a sort of contrast between sort of blacker blacks and whiter whites. And this is likely his harem. So in zebra society, you have one dominant male and then a group of 3, 4, 5, 6 mares and his offspring. and he will viciously defend them against any other interloping males. But they don't hold a territory as such. They don't demarcate an area. They don't scent mark. So a male is territorial over his harem, his females and his young, but not over a particular area. So when you do see those great big herds of zebras, there will actually be lots of individual little, I suppose you could call them family groups, but lots of harems as one living together, and there'll be an understanding between the males to keep themselves to themselves, but there will of course also be competition between them. And a male will always try and run off another male or steal one or two of his mares to join their own harem. Harsh, but good for genetic diversity. Almost feel he's sort of herding them off. So come on, it's enough. So males, when they do fight, can be very, very aggressive. They're quite cantankerous things, zebras. Very, very hard to train as well. It's one of the reasons that we don't use zebras or utilize zebras the way we do mules and donkeys and things. They notoriously have quite a weak back, so they're no good to us in terms of carrying loads. And they are incredibly stubborn. They will not be taught, and they do like to fight back. And two males having a fight is again pretty impressive to watch. There's hooves flailing everywhere, which can be very, very sharp. They rear up on their back legs, and they do a lot of nipping and biting, and it's quite normal to see a zebra with part of their tail missing. A lot of people think that that is a result of an attack by lions, because they will also try and attack from the rear quarters. And yes, of course, in some occasions it is, but probably the majority of missing tails are due to two males fighting and one nipping the tail off another one. There's a bit of a timeshare going on. This group is heading off, and we've got another group emerging from the scrub in the background. Interesting to see if we see any behavioural change from the dominant male of this group with these other ones coming in. Pretty sure the male is still the closest one to us, just having a drink now, looking at the coloration again. Oh, and there's our crocodile, or one of the towel crocodiles. Rather sinister shape of the crocodile lying in the shallows there. I was asked a good question a couple of days ago now as to how well crocodiles can see underwater. I was explaining about the clear nictitating membrane which allows them to keep their eyes open underwater, acts like a pair of goggles. Again, I did try and do a little bit more reading up on sort of crocodile vision in general, and certainly yes, they can see underwater. But not with any great level of acuity, not particularly sharp images, just because of the water and the design of their eye, but also because that nictitating membrane is just another barrier obstructing any light and any information from hitting the retina and to the optic nerve. So definitely can see underwater, but not to the same level that they can see on land, which by all accounts is nowhere near as acute as our vision is, for example. They can pick up movement and they can see the basics, but they wouldn't be able to read the newspaper from 50 meters away. Not that I could these days either. There was a couple of other interesting things I did find out about crocodile eyes there that I didn't know. So one of them is to do with the shape of their fovea. So the fovea is sort of the part of the retina where the biggest concentration of photoreceptive cells is contained. So we have a very, very small fovea and it's densely packed with those cells and gives us the ability to look around, focus on something, and then really see a great amount of detail. If you look at a lot of animals that inhabit more sort of open habitats, horses would be a good example, and the zebras that we've just seen. If you actually have a sort of a good close-up view of the eye of a horse, you can see there's like a horizontal line moving across it, or that you can see in there. That is the fovea. So instead of having a pinprick type of fovea, a lot of these animals have horizontal foveas, which gives them the ability to see more of the horizon. And crocodiles also have that horizontal fovea because when they're scanning the shoreline for potential food, they don't want to have to keep moving their heads around because that would give away their position as ambush hunters. So they have the ability to sort of scan the entire shoreline without moving their head and staying completely motionless, which gives them a far better idea of what is actually around them. So that's a great technique in terms of hunting and stealth. The other interesting thing I found out was to do with the actual receptor cells themselves, and that there is a difference in the type of wavelength of light they are sensitive to between freshwater crocodiles and the saltwater crocodiles that you get out in Australia, for example. So you get different sort of shades of light that are more prominent. If you've got something down there, what are you doing? In the oceans, you generally get things shifted more towards the blue end of the spectrum, and in freshwater, more towards the red end of the spectrum because it's murkier water, it's shallower and sort of darker colours, and the acuity of those the cone cells within a crocodile's eyes differ between those two groups of crocodiles based on their habitat. So ocean dwelling or saltwater crocodiles are more sensitive to the bluer end of the spectrum and freshwater more to the red end of the spectrum. So another nice example of nature having adapted and developed based on its surroundings. Quite sure what this crocodile is up to here. I don't think he's caught anything because he hasn't really moved. It could be doing is something called lithophasia, where they eat and swallow little stones. Maybe he's got a little rock or a stone down there. Oh no, he has got something. Like a barbel or something he's caught. A barbel or a catfish. Doesn't seem in a particular hurry to eat it. Ah, Jordan's in my ear. Jordan said she thought it looked like a snake. Possible. You do get pythons. I've seen puff adders swimming. I definitely had something. I thought maybe he'd be swallowing rocks and just dislodging rocks to swallow. That just helps with neutral buoyancy, so that they can be suspended in water. But definitely had something within his jaws there. Let's hope he lifts his head out of the water again. Come on. Good. It looked quite long and thin, so I thought some sort of barbel, but a snake is possible. Oh, wow. That is a snake. Must be a snake. How amazing is that, everybody? Let us know what snake that is. Doesn't look like a python. I don't see any markings on it. Mambas also swim. You never know what you're going to see, hey? How about that? A crocodile with a snake kill. That's pretty epic. Reptile on reptile. Yeah, definitely a snake of some sort. Quite a pale belly. Spitting cobra, snouted cobra. It's a good sized snake, whatever it is. Wow, look at that. Well, that's something I've never seen. I've seen snakes in water. I've seen snakes swimming. I've seen crocodiles catching fish, catching antelope, but I've never seen a crocodile with a snake. Joanne Mello says that you like crocs and you're glad to see them on the show. Well, so are we, Joanne, and this is an absolute treat for all of us. It, I just saw the head there on the left when he lifted his head up. It did look like it had a sort of a flattened head. I reckon that's a cobra. It looks something like a snouted cobra, perhaps, or a big mfezi, a big spitting cobra. It's strange. It doesn't seem to be sort of that fussed and swallowing up. It's swallowing it quickly, very much savouring it, giving it a good chew, then having a rest. I suppose the snake's not going anywhere at this stage, but I would kind of expected it just to be chomp chomp swallow. But maybe this is not something that the crocodile gets to experience very often either. It's very much savouring the taste. How amazing. Strange because still the head is there in the water. Maybe if you just start to swallow it down, we might get a glimpse. I thought I saw a flattened hood like one of the elapids, one of the cobras. I wonder if the snake wasn't already deceased and in the water because we saw the crocodile just sort of come drifting in. And normally snakes, when they do swim in the water, are slithering across. Oh, there goes the head. I didn't get a good enough look. Are slithering across the surface, and I'm pretty sure we would have seen the crocodile snap down on it. So I wonder if it had deceased and was on the bottom, the crocodile just happened to come across it. I guess we'll never know now. And there will certainly be no evidence when it comes out the other side. It's just this sort of green, slimy excrement, for want of a better word, that they produce. Scat, I suppose, being a carnivore, and that usually calcifies in the sun and just goes white. It's almost like a sort of a greenish white solid cowpat. There will be no evidence of anything left that you'd be able to ascertain what that was, such as the digestive juice strength of a crocodile. Rafiki21, you wanted to know about what unique hunting strategies crocodile use to catch their prey. Well, they are the ultimate stealth hunter. They've got the patience of Job. They will lie in the shallows waiting for something to come down to the water's edge for huge amounts of time. And they have different hunting strategies, but they very rarely will sort of chase after anything and take it out unless it's something like the animal crossing a river that is much easier to catch. What they do is have an incredible intelligence and an ability to learn the behavioral patterns of animals. So, and this happens with people as well. It doesn't take very long for a crocodile to learn that an animal or people or whatever it is may come down to exactly the same part of the river and get into the water or close to the water. The first time it happens, they'll probably get a bit of a fright and move away. The second time it happens in the same place, it's almost as if the penny drops and there's a little light bulb that goes zzz, zzz above their head, and they go, hang on a minute, I've seen this before, I'm going to commit this to memory. And by about the third time, the crocodile will be waiting for you, will have anticipated that activity. So that's been well documented, that they have the ability to learn the best places to hunt. I've also seen sort of footage of crocodiles lying in a pool underneath some rapids and just lying with their mouth open facing upstream, so that any fish or any other things that are caught in those rapids get washed down, and the jaw of a crocodile is so sensitive that the slightest touch and those jaws will snap shut with a huge amount of force, trapping whatever it is within there. So that's something also that you sometimes see is crocodiles lying with their mouth open, facing upstream in a strong current. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but those are very much what I would associate with a croc. But say the ultimate ambush hunter. What an amazing sighting that was. I think whilst we just have a look and see if there's anything else happening after that little flurry of excitement, I see I've had another question from Hey40. Thank you very much, Hey40, for your question. How can you tell a male croc from a female, and how do they mate? Carefully is obviously the classic answer. But in terms of sexual dimorphism, there isn't much between them. Between young ones, it's very, very difficult to tell the difference. Um, but generally speaking, if you see a crocodile that's sort of bigger than around about 3 meters, that's going to be a male. Females generally stop growing by about then, but some of the males will continue to grow and they can get really rather massive, so up to 5 meters or more. So if you see a particularly large crocodile, it's going to be a male. Now, other than that, it's very, very hard to tell the difference. And in terms of mating, well, a male will approach a female, and there'll be a little bit of a courtship ritual. There'll be some bumping, there's some vocalization. Sometimes they blow bubbles, sort of blow themselves up and hiss. And eventually mating occurs sort of similarly to you'd expect many other mammals to mate. There's a mounting procedure. Males, like lizards, have hemipenes, so two penises to choose from. He will only use one, and he will impregnate well, and she will gestate the eggs within her her interior. And when the time comes, she will dig a little nesting hole on the bank and deposit her eggs and cover them up, and then guard them very well. She's very attentive in her nursing duties. And when they do hatch, she helps them out of their shell and will even carry them down to the water in her mouth. So a nice bit of parental care, and she'll look after them for the first week or so in a sort of a nursery setting. So nice to see reptiles displaying some parental care. So sorry, hey 40, that was a quite sort of brief answer, but I hope that gave you what you needed to know. I sorry, I also missed a question earlier, which I'm very apologetic to Sandy for. She was this came through when we were talking about the zebras before we got distracted with our crocodile snake um, interaction we saw there. Sandy was asking if I've ever seen an albino or an albino zebra. We sort of discussed those yesterday. No, I haven't. I've seen some zebras with some sort of fairly unusual markings, some splotches on, as opposed to sort of neat stripes, but never a fully albino zebra or even a leucistic zebra. I think so. The problem is with their, generally speaking, they're sort of out in the open, going to have great difficulty with thermoregulation and be very, very obvious to any predators. So chances are they don't survive for very long, even the leucistic ones, let alone an albino zebra. Little and large going on at the moment. Our spur-winged goose on the right and a little blacksmith lapwing on the left. Big brother going on. Going back to the question on mating and reproduction, there is a species of crocodile, I believe, that can actually reproduce by what's called parthenogenesis, which is the development of of an embryo without the requirement of fertilization. Um, I don't know much about it in crocodiles. I would think that's highly unusual. You normally see parthenogenesis more in insects. Aphids, for example, are well known to do it. I think certain species of wasp as well. So yeah, rather unusual to find such a large animal involving in parthenogenesis. I still can't get over that snake. I'm still racking my brains to try and think if I saw anything distinctive on that snake or what snakes would be most prevalent up in the Dickways to think what that would be. But I'm pretty sure I saw a flattened hood, so I'm going to go with something from the cobra family or similar. But it was just very odd that we never saw any strike by the crocodile. I did see him when we just were beginning. Did look at him. He was sort of mouthing something in the water, but I wasn't sure what he was doing. So I've got a funny feeling that that snake may have been just dead already in the water and had sunk to the bottom, and maybe the crocodile hadn't to come across it. Because snakes generally don't go under the water too much. Pythons certainly can do, but I've never experienced or seen or heard of cobras sort of swimming underwater like sea snakes do. But maybe they do. I'm not sure. It'll be my next research project. Quite a lot of head movement going on from these zebras as they're approaching the water there. Often zebras do bob their heads when they walk just to give them a better view. With their eyes being on the side of their head, they can't see as clearly directly in front of them. So they do sort of sway their heads a little bit when they walk. But I've noticed with this group and the previous group we're watching more of an exaggerated motion of that. I'm just speculating here, but wonder whether perhaps coming down to water they're feeling a little bit more vulnerable and making sure they get a really good look at the surroundings. Maybe there's a lot of sound that's bothering them, or maybe it's some form of social interaction. Spending a lot of time with noses down as well, possibly getting some nutrients from the soil. It's the fun part about watching nature is trying to figure out why things are doing what they're doing, because they're generally always doing it for a reason. See, that sort of movement is because it flies. I'm sure a lot of insects around. It's disturbing them. Whether there's just also a sort of an air of, I suppose you could say, excitement that they might be getting a drink soon, but just making sure, always sort of keeping the emotions in check while they make sure it's all safe. are very mesmeric creatures. See the way those stripes do sort of blur the outline of each individual and make it much more difficult to discern, if you were a predator, how many individuals are in that group, who's facing which way, and then when they all move as one, becomes a very, very confusing optical illusion, which has been used by humans as well. In the Second World War, some battleships were painted with sort of black and white stripes going in different directions to confuse the enemy. Tried and tested method. One thing I always found interesting is the length of those young zebras, even a newborn baby zebra foal. Very, very long legs, so that there's no difference in the belly height between adults and young. Makes it much more difficult for an onlooking predator to spot a weak link somewhere within that great dazzle of stripes. I've always just loved them. My favourite thing about zebras is their manes. Always standing proud, unless they're not in very good condition. And I just love the way that the stripe pattern continues right the way up the neck and onto the mane. Of course, that mane, very important to see the condition of the zebra as well. A floppy mane suggests the zebra is not in very good condition, because one of the things that makes that mane stand upright is the layer of subcutaneous fat on the neck of the zebra. If the zebra is in poor condition, has some sort of disease, unable to digest its food properly, the body will start utilizing that fat reserve, and that will take away the structure holding the mane upright, and the mane will start to sag to one side. So it's one of the ways that you can look at a condition of a zebra, because it will always still look quite chunky just because of the digestive system. So the mane is a good giveaway for health. Rafiki 21, you're asking, how do zebras communicate with each other? Well, you can see there's a lot of tactile communication. We often see them resting their heads on each other. And we hear a lot of vocalizations between zebras as well. So that classic that you hear from zebras, often sort of a warning call, and there'll be a lot of scent as well. And every animal has its own unique scent signature. So a lot of olfactory communication. So all sorts of ways, really, and they have very good eyesight. I think we also had a suggestion, and a very good one for that matter, from, and you'll have to forgive me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, is Maestai Cunicorn or Patty, um, suggesting that maybe that snake met its demise when an elephant accidentally stepped on it, when an elephant went into water to have a drink or to feed on something in there. That's not a bad shout. That's certainly a possibility. I remember we saw on African a little while ago one of the most traumatic things I've seen in my life. Actually, we were watching some footage of little tiny, tiny baby lapwings. They can't have been more than about an inch or so high, and they were running around on the shore. And a great big elephant came down to have a drink, and trod on one. And there was just 1 minute we were watching a lapwing, and then there was a big elephant foot in its place. It was rather traumatic. I didn't really quite know what to say about that one. So that's certainly a possibility. Maybe there was a snake in the water that got trampled by an elephant. Who knows? Maybe a bird had caught it, an eagle, something like a marshal. It was a big snake, so it had to be a strong eagle and was flying over, and maybe it was a bit too heavy and it happened to drop it in the water. All of these things we can only speculate on. But I'm just very glad we saw it. It's one of the most unusual things I've seen for a long time. But we are running low on time now. It looks like we've only got about 5 minutes to go. Today's gone very quickly. We've had some lovely sightings. Giraffe drinking. We've had elephants jostling. We've had some interesting zebras. Obviously, the crocodile was probably the most exciting, unusual thing that we've seen. Some lovely bird life up in Kenya and at Vic Falls. But as always, if you've got anything that you would really like to highlight as a highlight, we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's proceedings. And very excited now to see what we might see tomorrow. That's the beauty of doing this. Some days are quiet, other days you see something highly unusual. Oh, this one have a little rub. So going back to the communication thing, what you often find with the youngsters is because mother will go off into the long grass when it's time to have her foal and spend a bit of quality one-on-one time with her new arrival. And during that time, the baby will very much learn the scent of his or her mother, but also learn the unique strike pattern. Remember, every strike pattern is different, just like a fingerprint, and a baby apparently is able to recognize or key off the pattern of the mother, particularly around the shoulder. You see at the top of the front leg there, you get that sort of interesting triangular shaped pattern. That's about eye height for the baby zebra, and that apparently is an area of the mother that they will have a very good knowledge of and potentially be able to recognize. But more often than not, individual recognition will come down to the smell. Bianca, you're saying the crocodile was definitely your favourite. I think it has to too. I mean, it's a clear winner. But we've seen some really lovely things. I particularly also enjoyed that shot of the giraffe. Thanks to our zoomies for that one with the sky behind them. That was a very sort of regal and magnificent pose. The two giraffe drinking in tandem. The elephant right at the beginning had a little bit of a very gentle push and a shove. That was exciting to watch. Our little lizards that we saw up in Kenya, we've seen lots of amazing stuff today. I cannot wait to get back into the bush. It's been too long. This is really whetting my appetite. And a lot of the scent from these animals is contained in urine and the droppings. You'll often see males from many species sniffing the ground around where a female has urinated, getting all that species specific information. But when they do, you'll know they're doing it because they'll pull that funny face where they sort of draw the gums back, expose the teeth in what we call a phlegm and grimace. And by doing that, that opens that special organ, vomeronasal organ or organ of Jacobson in the roof of the mouth. And by sort of pulling the lips back, it opens that little orifice there, and those scent particles take a slightly different route towards the brain and go through the appropriate software to decode that information. You'll see that in macaques, you see that in rhinos, you see that in antelopes and zebras. Elephants, you won't see it. You can't see an elephant phlegm and grimace, but you will see an elephant touching its trunk on urine or breathing in, sucking in the air from the urine into the trunk and then placing the trunk into the mouth and either sort of touching it with those lips if he's managed to get some of the urine onto the lips, or blowing the air directly into that organ. He's getting all that species-specific information. That's very important. They don't have the right software to decode another species information. Yes, they can. They might know it's from an impala, but they wouldn't be able to tell that it's Fred, who was in a good mood and here yesterday. But we're almost out of time, into the last minute. Thanks everybody for joining us today. It's been a really spectacular afternoon at the waterholes. Thanks to everybody in Johannesburg, to Jordan and to Dewa and the rest of the team, and of course for you guys for making it so special. I will be back again tomorrow between 12 and 2 Central Africa time, 1 and 3 Central Africa time, with another 2 hours of excitement, and I very much hope that you'll be joining us. Don't forget to join the live safari this afternoon. with the rest of the teams in Juma and Amakala. And whatever you're up to today, I hope it goes wonderfully and we've given you some great memories.